Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. It is November 3, year 2022, and the time is 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I believe that the proper flag etiquette when you have the Star Spangled Banner, the American flag, passing by, you're supposed to remove your hat. So I will do so. There you go. That's, by the way, the cover art. Welcome. Did I say that already? That's the cover art for the one of the main. I think there's 2 or 3 books that I looked at. This is more done more from a fan perspective, which is okay. In fact, she did all the artwork here. I was just really amazed by it because it does echo the color scheme of Wonder Woman without really infringing on the copyright, I guess. Her name's Carol Strickland. So that's the book right there, full of really interesting insights, but on the other hand, quite predictable in that this author equates Wonder Woman of today, right? Today's perception of her as being a feminist icon. She's not the only one. In the academic publishing world, as it turns out, there are any number of contemporary, I guess they would call themselves feminist scholars, whatever field they might be in, the social sciences, the humanities, the English department, art, theater, whatever it might be. There's a new generation of scholars who are taking not just Wonder Woman specifically, but comic books in general as an art form. And as I told you before, we were studying this as an art form way back in 75, 76 over at Bowling Green State University in the Department of Popular Culture. I'd have to say that there's some pioneers that predated even the popular culture department at Bowling Green. One such person is Dr. William Marston. Let me show the art. Here, William Marston. This is from an article. I think it was published in People magazine. Can't remember exactly. But it talks about his career, and I'll get to it in a moment, from academia, being recruited at a very early stage in Hollywood. In fact, the Hollywood film industry was making the transition from silent films, right? They would have captions. You know what that means, right? Silent. They'd have someone playing the organ in a giant cathedral of cinema, and they were going into sound films. Remember Al Jolson, the jazz singer? There are any number of experiments. And of course, there have been many innovations since that time. But that's not just the sole reason why Marston was there. And this is not what's really captured in this article. And I don't think there's a full length biography about Professor Marston himself. It's always in conjunction with Wonder Woman. And by the way, as we'll see in a moment, he was the subject of a biopic, right? A biographical narrative film done by an African-American lesbian. The reason I mention her ethnicity, her race, as well as her gender identification or sexuality definition is because it's an explicit part of the British PsyOp agenda here. And that's why they hired her as a Black woman and as a lesbian in order to put over what I believe, and this is my contribution to the discussion about Wonder Wimmins. And that's why I came up with the title Wonder Wimmins Polyandry. And I'm going to use polygamy, polyandry, and similar terms right in that wheelhouse there interchangeably. So if you're an anthropologist or a sexologist, please forgive me because I know they have specific meaning within your particular specialty, but I use polyandry in this case. But the point is, it is a PsyOp. It's another one of the PsyOps, and most people, maybe everyone that in fact, that's why I'm doing the show. I don't think anybody's really pointing their finger on it, right? Okay, we have an eerie quiet over the past year. In fact, over the past 2 years or so, when the bio pestilence was visited upon us, and it kind of shut up all the GLBTQ people. You saw Milo Yiannopoulos kind of disappear, and I guess the only people who kept on partying were these another synthetic group, the Proud Boys, also a Canadian, Five Eyes PsyOp. In case you haven't figured it out yet, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for that one. But what replaced it? What's the next stage here? Because they never give up. They being the PsyOp specialists, and I'm speaking more specifically of the Anglo-American PsyOp specialists, right? And yeah, okay, all right. Tavistock, okay, I get it. You know about Tavistock, but we're talking about Harvard too. We've been talking about Harvard University in conjunction with psychic investigation, William James, people like that. So they loom large in this Anglo-American PsyOp complex, if you want to call it that, right? By the way, I wanted to thank the people who are making some really incredible comments on YouTube, but also on the Patreon side. So I'm very gratified that people are, not that they're acting in such a way, but they are contributing to the knowledge base and to the interpretive structure or system or build out, if you want to call it that I'm trying to encourage, rather than just spinning around on the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Tavistock and the commies and whoever else, because that's only the tip of the iceberg, right? I call that the Annie Jacobson syndrome, right? You know all the characters, and that's making room for innovation for independent researchers, writers, journalists, and students, young people who can explore these topics that are much needed in order for us to escape the next wave of oppression. So let me finish my thought about that void that's been left in the wake of the so-called P-demic. I have to kind of skirt around, if you'll pardon the pun, right? Is that sexist language, to skirt around a topic? How about if I pantaloon around how about if I panty around a topic instead of skirting around it? Will that make you happy? All you language Nazis out there, you Karens, right? By the way, let me finish my compliment about the comment. The reason why I'm getting good comments is because there's not any numbnuts, newbies who are leaving stuff there. That's why I was always beginning. You're going to see it less and less now. But I was always at the top of the show insulting these people, so they'd go away and leave our space for ourselves, so that they would go to Dr. Todd Grandy or some of these other people, right? So there's a method to my madness, right? I used to do that at class too. The first day of class, it's Asian American studies, so they said, well, that how tough can that be? That's an easy A. It'll boost my GPA, my grade point average, which I was told to. They would tell me that. They were just unashamed about it. So I'd always come in very strong and just do a mind-blowing initial lecture, so that all the people who are laboring under misperception of what the Professor Hamamoto channel was about, or the show or the lecture, would disappear. However, 99% of them stayed, because I put out enough out there to intrigue them. It was nothing that they were able to find, whether it was at UC Davis or anywhere else. It was like looking at a seven-headed monster, a Hydra. And I was giving them all that information the very first day. So thank you very much for talking. Some of you understood what I was doing. It's called getting rid of the squares. In the early days of bebop, there would be these squares with their instruments they want to sit in, with Charlie Parker, and Miles Davis. They thought they had something to say, right? So they would call a tune that was really difficult and abstract, and would just blow all the amateurs off, and they'd never come back. All right, so that's where I got the idea of getting rid of the squares. Only the hipsters are allowed here. Or the adventurous ones, okay? So thank you very much. Don't think that I haven't been reading the comments and benefiting by them as well. Some of the stories are very interesting. Okay, getting back to our immediate story here about Professor Marston. Um, uh, I was really intrigued by this director. We'll see her in a moment. I'm not going to really dwell too much on her herself because I'm not interested in her film, which was called Professor Marston and the Women. Right. So my title is kind of a riff on women, and also it's a riff on this Black or African American lesbian who wants to promote polyandry on the part of the British PsyOp people, right? And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. So that's why in the title I put Wonder Wimmins, because that's dialect of certain Black people who come from a certain part of the rural South. People like John Lee Hooker that I've talked about before. Remember his song Boogie Chillin'? That's how we pronounced children. Right? I'm for linguistic diversity of all kinds in all countries and language. So I'm not making fun of it. I'm honoring that legacy, also that of Appalachians, of Asian immigrants, whoever it might be, Jews, Yiddish words, whoever. I'm I'm not mocking it. I'm embracing it. I think that is part of what Americana is all about. So anyway, that's an homage to John Lee Hooker, Booger Chillins, and he and Muddy Waters, who was from Mississippi, right? The Delta region, the fertile Delta, the black soil. Which, by the way, I think that was the how the Nile River is translated. Remember the riverine societies? It's full of occultic knowledge, all that black, rich soil, that fertile crescent. That's Americana. That's where all the civilization comes on. So that's Muddy Waters, and when his pronunciation of women was women's. All right. So I contrast Wonder Women's of today, which this Black director, lesbian by the name Angela Robinson, is trying to make everybody, right, especially the middle class, working class, are for the most part, who are on welfare, they're already in this system. Now they have to get the educated middle class to move into the polyandrous world that they are engineering for us. So to answer my own question, what happened to GLBTQ and critical race studies and all that garbage they're trying to force down our throat for the last 2.5 years, 3 years, longer than that, but it really started to get mainstream focused attention over the past few years or so. Well, it's polyandry, right? So I'm giving you all the heads up here. And this movie is an indication, a warning of where the social engineers are trying to take us. And to put it, my argument's more elaborate than that, but I have 60 minutes here. So, but in short, polyandry is going to be the new family, quote unquote, structure, the post family structure, because family is a dirty word in their mind of globalists. They're all bankers, the usual suspects. That's going to be the post family structure for the guaranteed income world where everybody is on the same, all working people. Of course, the illuminists and the high level people who are orchestrating all this to begin with there's going to be no ceiling for them. They're creating a ceiling, a little box, a glass house for us, a prison, of course, in the guise of liberation, in the guise of freedom, especially gender freedom. We're going to get rid of patriarchal oppression, right? People here in chat room, you know all about that strategy. We've seen that before. You read the book Propaganda, right? The Bernays, yeah. We're going to get Wimmins hooked on tobacco, run by the American Tobacco Company and all them other dope oligarchs. And we're going to call them Freedom Torches, and we're going to stage a parade down Broadway in New York City with the suffragettes, who also are the eugenicists and all the church ladies who were helping the native people and the poor Chinese overseas, Pearl S. Buck and, you know, these um, do-gooders, right? And they never went away. They just reformed, recast themselves in a new light. There was women's liberation, Gloria Steinem. And now we have Angela Robinson, a post-racial, post-family, post-gender advocate. And I know this because I checked out her background, and it's pretty easy to figure out. So this is the movie she was given. I think it's her first major feature, and the cinematography was good. So it really lures you in on a visual level. But the movie itself is a piece of garbage. Not just in terms of the ideology and the propaganda quotient, but it's just really poor drama. I mean, gosh, it's worse than made-for-TV movies that we used to see in the 1970s. But she's got money and she's got backing here. Where's that coming from? Well, a good hint is that Angela Robinson is married, quote unquote. See, the first was gay marriage. Now you're going to be married to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 people, right? Maybe even your own brother and sister are going to be part of that plural marriage system with a guaranteed universal income where everybody's a serf. She's married, quote unquote, and they have a son, and they live in Los Feliz in Los Angeles, which is where all the hipsters live nowadays, right? I know of any number of people that live. And there's some actors that live there too. It's not all Beverly Hills. Some of the younger actors. What's that guy's name with 3 names? Who was in Third Rock from the Sun, right? With John Lithgow, the kid. He was a teenager. I can't. But he's done a lot of movies recently. These futurist globalist type movie. He lives in Los Feliz. I went by his house. I have a friend who lived right across the street from him. All right. So that's where she lives. She lives in trendy LA with her husband or spouse or whatever, her post-husband. But as it turns out, her husband's father is a guy named Morton Kondracki, right? This is how I told you how all these positions are sewn up. He's a globalist. He's on the liberal end of a globalist spectrum, right? But he comes right out of military intelligence. And, he wound up on the enemies list of Richard Nixon. So he was anti, Nixon, and he's a Democrat, and he writes for the New Republic, which is an old liberal journal of opinion. I don't know and I used to read it because, I was an aspiring intellectual and I wanted to write for it, perhaps maybe one day even get published in The Nation. And turns out Katrina von Heuvel, who was the editor of The Nation, very similar, her father was OSS. All right. So again, my naivete, my stupidity, thinking that there was a meritocracy at work here and that I'd have a shot at these types of venues was misplaced. Am I bitter? No, I'm not, because I had a lot of students, or more than a few, would say, the only reason why you have this really obvious chip on your shoulder and this class resentment is because you really want to be part of it. And I had to think about that. Wow, not very long. So, and I'm just telling you this in case you're wondering as well. Why does this guy keep ranking on the people at the masked black and white ball that Truman Capote staged in 1966, right? Revisit that one. Stop talking about keep talking about the Rothschild, but let's bring it on back home, like to paraphrase Bob Dylan. No, I'll answer my own question. That is not why I'm doing this, right? I'm doing it so that we understand the nature of power in what should be the great American Republic that's in truth run by these occultic oligarchs, right? That's why I'm doing it. And the reason why I can make that claim is because I've told you many times, if you look at the playlist, and I want this show to be about me, it's about the content that I'm presenting here. But I had many occasions to be lured in or seduced, pimped, if you will. I had many, many encounters, and I haven't even told you about, given my position and my work and my pioneering path-breaking contributions to television media, film studies. You've heard enough of that. They really wanted to put me on the track, and only when I started talking about it and coming up with a concrete analysis of the media being part of this larger New World Order system, that's when they really started getting nervous and had to push me out. But I never took the offer. The secret hand was extended to me on numerous occasions. All right, I can give you specifics later, but I don't really have a lot of time right now. So if you're thinking that that's where I'm coming from, think again. You'll have to try harder. I'll talk about different scenarios, periodically. So subscribe to this channel if you want to hear some really funny anecdotes. So yeah, they try to put me on the track, ladies and gentlemen. If you know what that means, that's like they're trying to pimp me. They're trying to put me as a hoe out there. And as you know, academia is full of hoes. Intellectual hoedom in the sciences, humanities, you name it. And it's not because I'm moralistic about it, right? Because the world is all about pimps and hoes. If you want to see a good American documentary, a good one is called Pimps Up, Hoes Down. And I'm not going to, judge hoes. Pimps, you're pretty scummy. Hoes or whores, prostitutes. A lot of the women there do not have a choice. Just like a lot of, and the reason why I'm mentioning is because a lot of the women who are locked into the polyandry system, it's already a system. It's called the welfare state, and that's another reason why I titled this talk "Wimmins," because the ideological professional stance of Professor Marston with his polyamorous family. He was a Boston Brahmin type. He was elite, right, from family. I don't know where their money came from, but I think it was old wealth. But he said this is how he's going to remake society through the form of Wonder Woman comics. Yes, isn't that astounding? And it's not me saying that. Just fangirl says that, verifies that. But there's also all kinds of academic literature that underscore what I'm saying here, right? But that's not the gist of this talk here. The gist of this talk is warning us that we have to get on top, get ahead of this. We don't want to always react to CRT, so-called critical race theory. We don't always want to have to react to the latest iteration of what these social, cultural, political, economic engineers thrust at us. We don't want to be caught on the back foot all the time. We want to be like Vikings who initiate rather than react, right? And I'll be getting into Vikings before the end of this show because Wonder Woman, remember, is a fantasy. It's a post-gender welfare state, guaranteed universal income rehash of this is when it first started, 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Ideology, some utopian dream by Professor William Marston that's been recycled for the present by this woman, Angela. Well, she's just a front person, right? The real people are British financiers and probably City of London. How can I make this claim? Well, I bought the DVD thanks to the Patreon people. And I was able to look at the extras and I looked at the interview, and there's three principal actors. One of them plays Professor Marston, William Marston. One of them is his first wife. And the other one, I think she was a student at Harvard. Her name's Olive, undergraduate. And they have a happy family, as it's called, three of them. So I looked at the making of video and I said, because they had that, I referred to it last time, I think. They had that transatlantic or mid-Atlantic accent, which, by the way, was promoted by a Canadian Five Eyes. This is before Five Eyes. He was Canadian. He was masquerading as American, like a lot of supposed intellectuals, like Jordan Peterson. They're Euros, so they can pass. I can't. That's not a source of resentment for me either, by the way. I'm just telling you, you do not recognize your own enemy. You don't even know that Wonder Woman is your enemy today, right? Well, you do, the people who are in the chat room here and our subscribers. But I mean, the newbies who are comic book freaks and they have, Comic Con for you, and you're going to get upset that, you're going to get your panties all in a bunch because I'm insulting Linda Carter or whoever else is a Wonder Woman, spokesperson, right? So let me finish that. So Martin Kondracki is the father-in-law of Angela. And when I read that, I go, oh my gosh, yeah. He's part of the journalistic establishment, but on the left side. And he comes from U.S. intelligence, of course. He was in the Army intelligence. So anyway, that's for people who read those type of magazines or watch PBS. He was in the part of the McLaughlin group, right, on PBS, right, Petroleum Broadcasting Service, right, for the rich, wealthy people. And they watch Upstairs and Down. They won't have any dramas about Mexican Americans or others, maybe blacks, but it has to be these British adaptations for PBS, the sandbox for the rich, as it was once called. So here we go. We have William Marston here. This is him on the left, and I don't know who the two women on the right. They look like they're, silent era. They're getting the sound film technology, and he got a gig. Right, that's why it says Harvard to Hollywood. He got a gig at Universal Studios. When you think Universal Studios, forget about the amusement park. That attraction down in LA. This is the original Universal Studios when it was, run by primarily Jewish immigrants from Galicia, the Ukraine, those areas. Hey, coincidentally, the same place that's going to blow up in World War IV, if we're not, or World War III, if we're not careful, right? They come from that same region. So that war, it's Russia versus Neo-Khazaria. But these were the guys that ran Hollywood too. After the British pulled up stakes, because they were the first ones in the teens and the 20s, and then they brought the cigar merchants and the pant pressers, as Joseph P. Kennedy called them, right? The great Irish-American stockbroker. I remember him, and the founder of his own ethnic dynasty, right? He called a bunch of pant pressers. And he went into the movie business himself after screwing over Sputos Scutus and some other, ethnic types. Because this is a business that was only one step above prostitution in the eyes of respectable society. That's, that was their niche. Same with comic books, by the way. Comic books in their like film was dominated by Jews, by first and second generation Jews, right? Superman, and the story. I told you the very briefly about William F. Gaines. William Gaines. I forgot his middle initial. I don't know what his birth name was, but he could get by with anglicizing his name Gaines. But his dad was a founder of all these comic books that were being attacked by congressmen and church people, right? Especially the Catholic Church, because the church back in those days did have a moral and political force over their flock. So that's why the Vatican had to be corrupted over the subsequent decades, especially after Vatican II, and they had to queer them out and compromise them and bring them into the larger Neo-Hazarian banking Rothschild empire / Rockefeller, right? And the usual suspects, which finance Hollywood, right? There's not going to be any Hollywood without the Wall Street and the City of London financiers to provide the substantial capital that's required for the industry. But the same holds true for the comic book industry. And that's where Marston intersects with the two communities, the community of largely Ukrainian, Eastern European, Galician, probably Franco-Sabbatean Jews in Hollywood, and the same cohort primarily based still in New York City who ran the comic book industry. Okay, like William Gaines' father, who died mysteriously. I think he was hit by some kind of publishing newspaper wars There were gangsters, because there used to be like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 daily newspapers that would come out 3 or 4 times a day in all the major cities, New York or Chicago. So having turf and having your paper out there was like a life and death battle for these people, and they battled it out, man. This is in the early days of newspaper. Now they're all oligopolies run by Agent Press France or something, or Germany, right? Springer Verlag or some other company. But in the old days, it was a real business for Mensch. People, machers, badass dudes, hard guys, who would kill for the newspaper. Same with the Los Angeles Times, the Chandler. I mean, the LA Times building was bombed by labor unions, supposedly, but it was anyway. I'm getting this off topic there, but the LA Times was always pro Hollywood film business. It was the homegrown industry, right? So the reason why I mentioned this connection is because Marston was brought in by William Gaines's father. I forgot his name, but William Gaines, as you know, was the longtime publisher of Mad Magazine, which I loved, right, as a kid. Mad Magazine, I told you already, I used to beg my mother to buy it for me, and she didn't want to do it. She didn't want to buy me a 10-cent, 12-cent comic book. She thought it would rot my brain. And Mama, you was right. It did rot my brain. But every once in a while, she'd feel sorry for me and spend a quarter and buy me Mad Magazine. And I had, friends who somehow procured a copy of Mad Magazine. We would read it. So that's William Gaines. But his dad was doing all these comics that were getting under attack. So what did he do? He hired a Harvard professor, a Harvard-trained PhD by the name of William Marston to provide a front for his gory, lurid comic books, Tales from the Crypt, and those have been republished recently. And then he relabeled his comic book lines EC, which stood for Educational Comics. It still had the decapitations and the vampires and all this implied sexual perversion. And I'm sure they, some money had to pass in. So that was Marston's original gig. And then they said, hey, great, come out to Hollywood, work for Universal, because the Catholic Decency League are on our ass, and so are the congressmen, because anything with a Hollywood is going to get them headlines, and it's going to get them reelected back in the home district. So Marston went out there and he accommodated them, and he developed what is I guess, this common agreement. There might be some people in the history of technology that might dispute this, but Marston is usually credited for being the inventor of the lie detector, which is fake science. And a lot of, may not realize this, but in many, if not most, court trial situations, they don't take lie detector tests. It's a misnomer to begin a lie detector. And by the way, I'm mentioning this because Marston was such a goofball, utopian. Just like he thought that if we had multiple plural marriages, all wars would cease. There'd be peace and harmony abounding, wherever we look, because there'd be no jealousy, no rivalry, no competition for beautiful women's or rich husbands, which was really the plot line for early Hollywood movies when you think about it. He was utopian about his own little invention, the lie detector, right? Because he sincerely thought that if he had a machine that could detect deception, that lying itself would be eliminated from human realities. Well, I'll talk about delusion, right? And I mention this because we have the same fake utopian promises being tendered to us here, you and me, in 2022, especially through 2020, the 2.5-year plague that was visited upon us. Oh yeah, you just do what we say and you're gonna be protected, right? So you're going to be protected from poverty and homelessness if you get into a plural marriage, polyandry, right? Which in my mind is a response to crisis right? Political, economic, cultural crisis, right? The anthropologists are telling us, oh no, they're really fascinated with Tibet, right? Tibet, because there are, I think that's the norm, plural marriages. They have like even brothers who are married to the same woman, and they said what they're doing is taking a crisis moment in Tibetan history now and universalizing and transposing it to the past. And that is a common failing, maybe intentional, I don't know. Maybe they're innocent mistakes, but that's a common strategy used by anthropologists. Speak of anthropology, I'm going into the literature to talk about some of these issues that seem to be having us run in a vicious circle here, right? I'll give you an example. Coming of Age in Samoa by Margaret Mead. She was in some Samoan island for, I've read scholarship about it. I thought she was living there for 5 years. It turned out she was like there for 3 months and wrote a whole book about sexual practices in Samoa. And her lesbian girlfriend, by the way, was Ruth Benedict, who wrote a book about my people called The Chrysanthemum and the Sword, which is supposed to be about the evil Japanese psychology. This is propaganda, running up to World War II. She had never set foot in Japan. She studied my people in concentration camps who were Japanese Americans. They were more versed in baseball and Americana than they were of the home country. But that helped to foster the creations of Dr. Seuss, who wrote anti-Japanese propaganda. And Margaret Sanger, you know who she is. I know her primarily as being the architect of the Japanese Exclusion Act of 1924, right? All the social scientists said, yeah, look at Margaret Sanger, and this is why we have to keep these people out of the country, right? And on it goes. So this is where Marston is coming from, and this is how the mass media of the time, movies and comic books and magazines are much more, especially magazines, the printed word, newspapers, much more. I'm talking about the physical papers. They're still important today, but I'm talking about physical, not PDFs and the media that the way we use it today, right? Very important. So that's what he did, and he hired himself out. And again, at the top of the show, I told you that I myself was offered opportunities like this, not by Universal Studios as such, but by Annenberg School of Communication, which was founded by the ill-gotten wealth of a newspaper man named Mo Annenberg, who was total mafia. I told you the newspaper wars were total mobbed up, man. There's some people who get killed, right? And then once you come out as a top gangster, then you have all this wealth. Annenberg, you can become an ambassador to the court of St. James's. That's J. Walter Annenberg, right? All of a sudden, you're a J. Walter. You're no longer Mo or Izzy from the hood, right? From Chi-Town. And you can start endowing schools of communication at USC or at the University of Pennsylvania. Each of them have a Annenberg School of Communications. Anyway, so yeah, they wanted me to hold down the Asian American community. That's what I was being cruised for, run by a gay dude down in LA. So I probably would have had to submit to some sort of gay ritual initiation. I don't know, because I didn't go to any of their mansion parties. So anyway, I told you I would come up with some amusing anecdotes that involve me. So I kind of understand where Marston was coming. The inducement. I mean, it's Hollywood too. This is like golden age Hollywood, not like Me Too Hollywood, where you have to be a lot slicker to get away with what they were doing there regularly and openly, in full view of the Los Angeles Times and the Chandler family. All right, so I'm giving you a little bit of the smut because you can read the mainstream biographies of Marston. Of course, it's being told through a post-gender, pseudo-feminist, academic feminist perspective, how he's liberating women. How do you liberate women? By getting them into bondage and ropes and rope play. And he himself was a submissive, but his thesis, Marston, was that women are only free if they submit themselves absolutely and freely to men. So he was, in truth, he was a sexist. So they got it twisted. They got it backwards. But it doesn't matter to them because the agenda is to get people, you and me, normies, right? Because a lot of super wealthy people and the real poor people, who are on the welfare state, and that's why they put a black lady as a director here. Most of them are underclass black women created because that was proof of concept by the welfare state, the Great Society and Lyndon Johnson, start with the Kennedys, and everything. And the budget got bigger and bigger. And oh yeah, we're going to take care of the underclass. We're going to clean up the cities and the ghetto. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. It's about at the lowest ebb in 2022. That's why I'm giving these talks with the added impetus of desperation. And we got to get our heads together real quick. We got to work with the black community as well and everybody, right? To say, man, that's why I support Ye. He's figured it out, right? He says, time to get off the plantation, man. So when I say women's, the black community was, because they were husband and wife. There's a guy, Herbert Gutman, and a couple of other social historians from the late 60s, 70s, wrote about the black family. And it was not the pathological family we were beginning to be told about. And there was nothing pathological about it. That's not my term. That's their term, right? In the 60s, oh, the black family's dying. It's out, it's all the crime, and then more recently, it's the hip hop and all the drugs, right? But they were writing the history, said that's just a response to the crisis that was created by capitalism, right? These guys were all leftists, so they didn't realize that the left program of welfarism was part of the problem, if not the tool of control of these various communities. And by the way, before that, but out of sight of the major cities, right? We're talking about urban situation for black people, but out of sight in the reservations, it was beta tested on Native America. And in response to that, their families started undergoing these different transformations, right? So what we're seeing now is a pre-adaptation that's being sold to us in the crisis of the permanent Great Reset, which everybody knows about, right? I mean, you've heard about it, right? So that part of the Great Reset is the restructuring of intimate relationships, household relations. Privacy is dead. It's gone. We know that. So now they have to put the capstone on it by creating something that has some sort of utopian appeal to people called polyandry, polygamy, polygyny. Goes by a different description. Then they're saying it's an anthropological universal. Yeah, just like Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead were cultural universals. We know that the social sciences are used for political agenda, so we know that the hard sciences are used for them. We know that literature is, journalism, we know that. We're hip to your game. But we don't know the subtleties of the Marston agenda of 2022. And once we do understand it, as mind-boggling as it might seem, you can maybe have to watch this talk more than once and chat amongst yourselves in the comments. I appreciate you might be in a relationship like that. I'm not passing judgment on it, right? Because what you might be involved with is adapting to the fact that men are losing jobs in droves, especially white men, quote unquote, right? And it's not white versus black or men versus women. I'm saying these populations are targeted to put the larger society into crisis. So the polyandry and jobs in general are beginning to disappear, right? Well, not beginning to, they have been for the last 50 decades as we started to deindustrialize, which is also part of the plan. The political economic system is transforming. Humanity has not moved to the place where the social political engineers, the Great Reset people, the Davos people, it's not at the place where we're entirely subjugated. So they have to resuscitate Wonder Women in the popular culture in order to get us back into the compliance mode, right? Make it cool, make it trendy, make the celebrities say, oh yeah, I want to be like whoever, ABC. I'm sure there's any number of polygamous Yeah, Jada Smith, Will Smith and Jada Pickett Smith, they openly advertise, yeah, we're in a polygamous relationship. So on and on and on. But they're only on a celebrity level. Like, let me finish the thought there. And I'm not casting aspersions. I'm not denigrating underclass Black people. I'm saying they're responding to the systematic um, undermining of their local economies, right? You heard about the Harlem Renaissance and Black communities, East St. Louis. They had their own scene, had their own banking, their own schools, and certain aspects of segregation was, I won't say it's beneficial, but it forced them to take care of business, on their own. They had their own music, right? No, it's no accident that Miles Davis came out of East St. Louis, and they had their own uh, Black Freemasonic traditions, also self-help. They didn't go to the government, right? The so-called health and education and welfare market, Heckler Department of Education, all the federal centralization. No, they trained their own teachers and their own dentists, their own doctors, their lawyers, and artists, of course, and kept it local, right? So that's why I call it Wimmins, Wonder Women's. And you will see, look for it on your side. I know we'll get to it, but I had a clip here but you can check it out on yourself if you don't believe me. There's tons of material about Black women talking about how great it is having multiple husbands, right? That's an adaptation to the welfare system that prevents any woman receiving welfare, not just for herself, but for her children, to have a man in the household. So they're being paid to stay away, and they're also being paid to have multiple men coming through. And that's the utopian part for the male part, because if they can get sex from this one woman or multiple women, hey, it works on a temporary basis. On a long-term basis, it's destructive. Anyway, that's just part of my analysis here. Let's take a look at this swamp creature. Here's the making
Professor
of
Marston created
film.
the Wonder Woman character, and she was inspired strongly by the two women in his life, Elizabeth and Olive. And Wonder Woman sort of encapsulates all the wonderful aspects that he had admired and observed between these two women, and how strong they were as separate entities, but also as a unified powerhouse.
The expression of their love for each other and the different dynamics in his life infused this incredible pop icon, which we all know today. Wonder Woman wasn't created to be just a regular superhero. She was created by this guy who really specifically wanted to make her psychological propaganda. He was a psychologist, and he wanted to kind of insert his ideas about men and women and feminism and psychology into Wonder Woman.
He wanted young girls of his time to grow up with a figure like Wonder Woman that shows a young woman they can do anything. If they put their mind to it, they can be anything.
He wanted to save the world by trying to get into the minds of men, and he was starting with his generation of boys and change how they thought about women and how they thought about war and how they thought about love, so that there'd be peace on the planet.
William Marston was a Boston-born thoroughbred. He comes from a very historical family, was very intelligent, wrote 5 books. He had a theory called disc theory. He basically believed that every social situation, whether it be the policeman and the criminal, or the teacher and the student, or relationships, or any sort of dynamic, could be broken down into these 4 categories of emotion: dominance, inducement, submission, and compliance. And this theory was something that he drew on throughout his whole life. It influenced everything he did, from the invention of the lie detector test through to attributes and the tools that Wonder Woman had.
He thought that men would never give up their power voluntarily. So he reasoned that if he could have women realize what he called their captivation emotion, just kind of their sexual allure, and train men to love being submissive, then that would bring about peace on the planet, basically.
You are very brilliant.
I know.
Smarter than me.
I know that too.
I began the process wanting to write a biopic about Marston, and I thought that he was a guy who had a wife and a mistress, and that they all lived together, but it was separate. And then I read this kind of incredible detail, which was that after Marston died, Olive and Elizabeth stayed together for 38 years, and that just blew my mind. I was like, oh, whoa. Do you know what I mean? Like that, this wasn't just...
Okay. Yeah. I think the real art of that movie is where the financing came from. That whole clip shows that the lead actor, who's Dr. Marston, is British. Cool, that's fine. Okay. But the other two are also British, and this is an American movie. So that's why I'm saying that, hey, this is a British PsyOp. And I don't have time to show it, but I have this literature like from the Royal Society, the lineage of that, right? Where they're promoting polyandry, right? So that's why I say it's a British, it's more accurate, it's probably Anglo-American, but this film here itself is strictly the one where they have the black American lesbian woman fronting for who's part of through marriage to the Anglo-American intelligence network. So notice she says with a straight face, the utopian, there's going to be world peace forever. All the aggression, all the male aggression, all the patriarchy, all that testosterone, and you don't even have to castrate anybody. You just have to reformulate their psychology. Well, I'm here to tell you that it ain't happening. And it's not I, meaning Professor Hamamoto, who's telling you this. It's the reading that I'm getting from the larger popular culture saying that the patriarchy is not going away. And why even call it patriarchy? Let's call it life. Let's call it humanity. And the warrior culture is on the rise. It's growing all over the place, right? We've seen all the stuff coming from Mr. Miyagi, really weak, like maybe Jackie Chan type stuff, or Keanu Reeves. He's a ninja. There are no real Asian ninjas shown on there, right? We can discount that, but there are lots of Asian martial arts that you can see that's real. It's coming from there. But you didn't know that there's a whole revival throughout Europe. So let's take a look at that. There's also a revival, as we saw within Native America. Let me very quickly show you how the Japanese warrior tradition intersects with the Native American in the late 19th century. This is part of the American history you don't get to see. Yeah, there's your warrior there. He's Blackfoot. This is taken up where well, here's where his sword came from. These are the people who went to London and Geneva and Paris. This is samurai class. This is the Irakura mission, by the way. And you notice they always negotiate with a sword. The traditional samurai class carried two swords to talk about their status within the society. And even though that system ended, the mentality never went away. So how does this blend in with contemporary feminism? Well, they took on the Iroquois mission. These are Japanese women of 1872 and 74. They're not the lotus blossom types that we see in the Hollywood movies, okay? They were negotiating with the European banking establishment in the 1870s on an equal level, and they demanded equality, which is really unusual or very rare. From a society where the European bankers wanted to conquer them, but they didn't go along with it. And this is what happened. This is a result of the Russo-Japanese War, World War I, and then World War II as a result. And now they're brought back into the fold. So, okay, that's, part of my, heritage that's integral to this tradition. But let's look at that of the Northern Europeans, right? Even from those countries, I'll call them Scandinavian. I know Scandinavia is too broad of a word, but Denmark, Norway, Sweden, of course. these are synonymous with actually existing state socialism or social democracy, which are held out to us by left liberals, how America could be with a welfare state. And of course, that's breaking down as well with the mass immigration that's being imposed on this society that accepted state socialism in the wake of World War II, not knowing that they were opening the gate to their own destruction, right? Notice how slavery is a common theme. Slavery is always presented to you in the form of liberation and security. So do you think the Swedes or the Vikings, we talked about them, right? The people who founded Rus means red. These are the Norsemen who founded Moscow and these areas, right? The Varangians, right? Varangian Guard. This is all part of the history that we don't get to know. Or the colonists from, we're talking about Scotland and Ireland and the British Isles, right? The so-called Vikings, the Norsemen. But they haven't been subdued or subjected entirely because of the Swedish or let's just call it Scandinavian again, right? I know there's a difference. The welfare, the Northern European model of welfare state, social democracy, which is what America is in already. I mean, we're already in it. Unlike other parts of the world, we're still in denial. We still think we're sovereign cowboys, and gunslingers and all that, but and that makes it even worse in America. The job is even more difficult because we're still operating on the delusion that we have freedom, but we're not. So let me give an example of what they're doing up in, I think it's in Norway here.
Yes.
That's it.
Flip him over.
Yeah. Good plan. Break the hold. Come on. That's it. Twist. Keep moving.
Yes.
Keep moving.
Keep moving. Yes. Get out. Here one.
So this one gentleman there, you didn't get to see him, but he's codified these older traditions. I don't know where he got it from, his grandparents or whoever, his fathers. He might have grown up in a rural area that still held on to their traditions and calls it glima, the system. And as you see, he's got a lot of people who were trying to learn the traditional Viking grappling arts. And that's just, you say, well, this is an isolated case. No, if you want to look on YouTube, you will find tons of material on there about this resurgence on the martial traditions all around the world. So Wonder Woman, you're a fantasy, you're a fake, you're a cartoon character, you're a TV show. These academic feminists live in a world of fantasy that they construct for themselves. I'm showing the reality, what's going down now in 2022.
All right, folks, here's another frequently asked question that deserves its own video. How do I get into HEMA, Historical European Martial Arts, if I don't have access to a club or school? Now, I covered this a couple of times in live streams, and I made a video about it a few years ago, but it should definitely get an update. And this also applies to other martial arts, or historical martial arts at least. If you want to learn a modern martial art, or one with a living tradition, it's probably better to join a school, and it's more likely that you have one available. But historical martial arts are, even though they're spreading, they're still not as popular as other martial arts, and it may be hard to find something. So,
okay, it is spreading by leaps and bounds. And again, this is one of the positive reactions to the crisis that's been imposed by NATO, the United Nations, the globalist organizations, to sever us from these traditions. It's not just Scandinavian, Southern European. Let's take a very quick look at a maestro of dagger fighting, which goes, these are recorded in Shakespeare and all the literature, right? This is the reality of humanity going back forever.
Anticamente quando io ho incominciato a fare questo scherma da piccolino, i miei maestri insegnavano le tecniche della scherma. che ero molto elegante e con armonia, specie con il bastone, perché tutti e due bastone e scherma di coltello andavano di pari passo, si facevano insieme. Per un'ora si faceva la scherma di coltello, per un'altra ora la scherma di bastone. Col passare del tempo, come tutte le cose, è stata molto elaborata, perché cioè io l'ho cercato di elaborare sempre meglio, non che i miei maestri non ne facevano bene, lo facevano bene, però io l'ho incominciato a elaborare in base alle mie esperienze che ho avuto nel frequentare altri tiratori di bastone. Una volta che i miei maestri sono morti, io ho girato ancora, ho visto la calabrese, ho visto la scherma.
Well, yeah, I see this taking place all over the place, and there's ample representation of women that even predate the modern period. I think this might be, yeah. Here's a good example of this.
This is naginata. It is a weapon with which the opponent is literally swept away. Naginata is another form of Budo, being peculiar to the Japanese woman.
So you hear it's specific to the Japanese woman. So the premise of Dr. Marston is faulty. Women have always been empowered. They've always been involved in the self-defense of their families and of their communities, including in Japan. This probably goes back 500 years during the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period, where when the men were away fighting each other in order to defend the home, the women were trained with the naginata jutsu, right? Or in case a castle was stormed, they were able to defend. So that's not been the problem, right? Most societies did not need a Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman was invented in a society where the welfare state was beginning to emerge, where the central power run by bankers and their universities with the social engineers, the psychologists like Marston and your biologists, right? Your Flexners, right? Your psychiatrists, all the power establishment. People like Michel Foucault, by the way, wrote about this extensively. And I mention that because he's the darling of these people. I think they took Michel Foucault's observations and they weaponized them. They're using, because he was tracing this historically, right? This power, especially sex power, gender power, and they turned him on his head. So I'm saying that Wonder Woman is for anybody who understands history, your own respective history, and that's why it's important to maintain the stories and talk to older people, right, who are still in touch with us, these traditions, and write them down and share the stories. But for those of us who are in touch with that, Wonder Woman is a redundancy. It's a cartoon. It is a comic book. All right. And the academic feminists are going to be thrown back, but a lot quicker because we're in front of it. We're not reacting to it. We already know where you're heading because Professor Hamamoto, through his naginata jutsu, which is basically a sword on a pole, we can keep you away. We don't even have to engage you. You're not even going to get close. You're not going to close in on us because intellectually, we know what you're coming for and we know what you're after. To mix metaphors, there's going to be no Trojan horse this time because we've seen the patterns over the 2.5 years of the lockdown. We know your MO, your modus operandus, and the modus operandi. And you're seeing there's an efflorescence of resistance in areas that you're not even aware of. I wasn't. When I heard martial arts, I just default, okay, mixed martial arts and, karate, judo, iaido, or Kung Fu, whatever, I thought Asian martial arts, but there's tons of revivals going on all over the world in the part of the world that we thought was lost forever, and that's the world of social democracy, so-called. The great Swedish experiment in socialism, right? Volvos, IKEA, all that good stuff, the Swedish bobsled team, right? All of that, man, they were being fed that for the incorporation into NATO worldview. Sweden is still holding out on NATO. In fact, most of the population is anti-joining NATO, but the oligarchy, the same ones who are promoting polyandry, polygamy, and sexual freedom, quote unquote, right? Remember those movies in the 60s, I'm Curious, Yellow, and right, the Northern Scandinavian people being sexually enlightened, right? Part of the Americans had to get with the whole swing in 60s, right? That was part of the bait to bring us into that. But we see that there's some Vikings out there who are shirtless and grappling. So anyway, I wanted to leave you on that positive note. And women's, yeah, or women, however you like, and men, right? Men and women, we hold up. We're both ends of the sky. We're both ends of we're the foundation, we're the legs there. So understand that and live it, and we're going to come out okay. All right. That's the good news for the first week of November. Yes. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll catch you soon, God willing. Bye.